Cool, perfect. Right. So we're taking a little bit of a departure from the kind of Ableton stuff. We're taking a bit of a departure from the kind of making tracks stuff, getting into sound design. And today's workshop is going to be all about what I like to call like synthesizer architecture, right? Now you might be thinking this isn't necessarily something that as like a musician, as somebody who is kind of creating, music, you would necessarily feel like you need to know too much about. But I think it's super useful if you are planning on kind of doing any sound of your own sort of sound design in your work, especially because uh, one of the best ways to kind of like understand sound design and how kind of synthesizers especially work and how to use them is to really understand like what's kind of going on under the hood and like why things sort of when you change like a parameter on a synth, why is that actually causing that to sound like that, right? Why is that happening, right? Um, and I'm going to be using this program right here as a teaching tool for today. This is VCV Rack. Um, this is the plugin version of this, but this is technically a free piece of software that you can run as kind of a standalone thing. It's essentially its own kind of digital audio workstation in a way, but what it is it is a virtual modular environment meant to pretty accurately mimic the kind of like Eurorack modular synthesizer environment that tons and tons of manufacturers make stuff for, including there are a lot of things in here, like all of this stuff by 4MS Company, that actually have hardware equivalents to them, right? So they've ported their kind of hardware into sort of digital versions in VCV Rack right here. And I also know that this menu that we're scrolling through right now can probably be overwhelming. These are all of the individual different modules that are available basically for free with VCV Rack. So as you can see, this goes super, super deep. We are going to mostly be focusing on some of the more kind of simple stuff today, though. And I'll probably keep us, we'll say, kind of exclusively in the, if I can find it, the kind of like stock devices today. Because these actually work out really, really well for kind of using as teaching tools, I would say, right? So you notice that there's already kind of two modules set up here. We've got one thing right here called the MIDI to CV. In this case, CV stands for control voltage. And this has a bunch of outputs, right? So what this is going to do is it's going to take MIDI from the incoming MIDI signals going into the track and the DAW, right? And it's going to convert a bunch of the different aspects of those MIDI messages into individual kind of control signals here, right? And then the other module that's already populated is this audio output module. This is basically just kind of like the final stage for audio for this. So when I plug in the two kind of stereo inputs over here with something, that's going to go out to the track, and then we're going to be able to hear it, right? Cool. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of start building up a synthesizer, kind of one module at a time. And then we're going to talk about how those all connect to each other. And then we're going to kind of focus on like modulation today too. We're going to focus on the kind of common modulators that you'll see in synthesizers and kind of how you can utilize those in a bunch of ways. All right. Cool. So let's go ahead and I'll right click to open up this kind of menu right here. And the first thing that you'll kind of need to get a synthesizer working would be an oscillator, right? There's a bunch of different types of oscillators, and usually the different types of oscillators you choose kind of determine the type of synthesis you're doing, but I'm just going to use at least one of these sort of very simple, just basic VCOs that they have here, right? Cool. And I apologize for what I'm about to do because it might get a little bit loud, but just so you can kind of hear what's going on, I'm going to take the sawtooth output right here, and I'm going to patch it into our audio device. And just to be sure, you were able to hear that, right? Okay, good. Means I set up audio correctly. Nice. Cool. So we can hear that we've got an oscillator running. Obviously, for a synthesizer, we want to be able to kind of control this oscillator in a few ways, right? One of those ways would be just being able to kind of tell the volume of it to kind of turn on and off with maybe like a keyboard stroke, right? Or MIDI keyboard. So in order to do that in the very, very simplest way possible, you would use something called a voltage controlled amplifier, right? So I'll select one of these, right? And VCAs are almost kind of like the backbone of especially modular synthesis. You can kind of think of them as both ways to kind of like amplify signals, but also ways to kind of attenuate signals and ways to use certain types of signals to kind of control other types of signals, right? So what I can do is I can take that sawtooth output from the oscillator. I can place it into the input of that VCA, right? And then I can take this CV input here of the VCA, and maybe I'll take from my MIDI to CV module, I'll take the gate output. And you'll notice as soon as I put that gate output into that input, our kind of level indicator has gone gray, right? So now what happens is whenever I actually press a key on a MIDI keyboard, you can see that gate signal is coming in, right? And then what I can do is I can take my output and I can set it over here to our kind of audio out device. And now we have like an extremely, extremely simple kind of like synthesizer voice going on right now, right? We just have a sawtooth that's even at a fixed pitch, but I have the ability to turn it on or off using a MIDI note, right? And so that's one thing that I kind of want to talk about kind of right out of the gate and kind of make sure that you're aware of is this is an audio signal coming out of this oscillator, right? You can kind of see in that menu that pops up when I hover over that. You can see that kind of fluctuating number where it says V. That's kind of going between kind of negative and positive there. And you can also see that this is kind of like flashing this sort of like orange color, right? What this program is doing is it's actually mimicking an actual like analog audio signal that would be running through analog audio cables, essentially, right? And then right here, we can see the output of this VCA right now. It says 0.00 volts there. So that shows you that there's kind of no kind of output coming through. But as soon as I open the gate, we get that same audio signal that's kind of allowed through, right? Now, the gate signal on the other end, this is what we kind of call a CV source, right? Or maybe a modulation signal or just some kind of a control signal, right? So when the gate's not open, I'm not holding a note down. We don't have any voltage coming out of there. I'm going to go ahead and turn this level down because I'm going to try to talk over that. But when I open the gate, we can see now it's just sitting at exactly like 10 volts, right? Not really fluctuating or anything. And we can see it turned kind of bright green there, and it was able to kind of turn that up, right? So that's going to be kind of like the biggest difference between kind of control signals or CV signals, as we'll call them in here, and audio signals, is that audio signals are kind of like free running, and they are the things that you would eventually kind of listen to. These control signals, if I were to take this gate output And instead of going to this CV input of the VCA, I like went directly in here. I would be shoving a big like DC offset straight to the speakers, right? So that's something that you kind of want to be careful of if you're going to be using this program, is kind of being aware of the difference of sort of control signals and audio signals. You don't necessarily want to send control signals out to your speakers really ever, because most of the time they're not going to be actually audible. And even if they are, they're not going to be pleasant. Right. Uh, so the next thing that we want to do to make this very simple synthesizer sound a little bit better is we can actually make it change pitch, right? So we've got this 1 volt / octave pitch output right here, right? And that's just an emulation of the way kind of analog synthesizers tend to work, I would say. But in this case, just know that this is the sort of control signal that's going to send out pitch information, just like a MIDI note would. So particular MIDI notes will send out particular sort of like pitches depending on where you put them in like a piano roll or what MIDI note you're actually playing on like a MIDI keyboard or something. So this is basically just that signal. I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it into the 1 volt per octave input right there. Right. Now, when I start playing different notes on the keyboard, right, I'm actually able to play different pitches there, right? So now we've already created kind of like our very, very super, super basic synthesizer, right? We just have one oscillator, we have one amplifier that's controlling the volume of it, and we have two very, very kind of simple MIDI controls that are sending sort of the note on and off information and the pitch information, right? Uh, but we don't really have a whole lot of kind of sound design capabilities from this at all, right? It's just note on, note off, pitch, and we can only use the sawtooth waveform, right? So to make things a little bit more interesting, let's see if we can find a way to kind of either blend together or maybe kind of switch between the different waveform outputs that this actually has, right? As you can see, we have a square wave output, we've got a triangle wave output, and we've got a sine wave output that are all on separate kind of channels, right? So we don't have the ability to use this to just sort of switch between them, right? So what we could do is we could grab a switch of some kind, or we could potentially grab a mixer of some kind. I think for this one, it probably makes the most sense to do kind of a mixer, right? So this is the kind of quad channel VCA mix that comes with VCV Rack. And what we can do is we can take this input for the sawtooth wave, we can put it into kind of the equivalent channel on here. Same thing with maybe this square wave, same thing for this triangle and maybe this sine wave. All right. And then up here, I've got controls for the individual volume levels of each of those oscillators. So I'm just going to bring all of them down for now. All right. And then the main mix output of this mixer is actually right here. So that's now going to go directly into the VCA. All right. And so now if I want to change the actual sort of tone, right now, I'm not kind of getting any sound out of this because I've turned all of these levels off, right? So what I would have to do is I would have to go, I can turn up the level of the square wave here, right? Or I could turn that down and I could turn back up the level of the sawtooth wave. Or what's kind of nice is I could actually take both of these and I could turn them both up and kind of blend them together. Right? I could maybe take away the sawtooth. I could add in, say, the triangle and the square wave together, and that'll give me maybe a little bit of a deeper-ish sound. Maybe add in the sine wave. So that's one, method of kind of blending different waveforms from an oscillator together in order to get sort of more kind of complex sounds, right? The other way that we could potentially do this if we were kind of building a synth ourselves is we could go for, again, kind of a switch. So the switch I'm going to choose is this one right here, which is called kind of like a 4-to-1 thing. And I'm going to remove this from here. And I'm going to go here, 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 and there, right? And so this has a slightly different way of kind of switching between all of these outputs, right? So right now, kind of just getting that sine wave first, right? Because what I need to do is I need to send a signal into this kind of trigger input in order to change my oscillator to a different one, right? If I want to do that, I could use this just little push button module. And I could take this trigger output of this push button module and I could load it into the trigger input right there. And now it's a little bit difficult to see, but you'll notice that a little light kind of lit up next to the second kind of input on the switch. And we should now be hearing the triangle wave come out of there. And if I push this again, we're into the sawtooth wave and to the square wave, right? So I'm going to go ahead and set that as the method of changing between the oscillator shapes. We'll have this kind of combination of this switch and this kind of push button to just cycle between them. By the way, do you have any questions so far?
No, this is new, but interesting. Yeah. I'm following.
Totally. Cool. All right. So we've kind of gone through a way to get slightly more complicated sounds out of this just by switching between different oscillator shapes, right? Let's go ahead and make our kind of ability to shape the volume of this sound more complex now too, right? And with that, we can use an envelope generator. I'll go ahead and add this ADSR envelope generator right here. You can see we have these sliders to kind of control attack time, decay time, sustain level, and release time, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the gate output of the kind of MIDI interface, and instead of sending it directly to the VCA, I'm going to, real quick. There we go. So what I did is I took the envelope output, which is going to be the output of this envelope generator, and I routed it into the CV input of that VCA. And then I'm going to take this gate input and I'm going to route it to the gate output of the MIDI device. So now we have the ability to shape the volume of the sound, right? So I can turn up the attack time, turn it down, turn the decay time down or up, increase my sustained level, or decrease it by a lot. Which that to be kind of normal, and then increase or decrease that release time. Right. So it's a standard ADSR envelope generator, right? But I just want to really, really emphasize how I'm kind of getting it to do what I want it to do, right? I am taking this gate output that is listening to the note on and note off messages that are coming from the MIDI keyboard. It's opening or closing this gate input, and then when the gate signal comes in, that will move through the attack and decay phase of the envelope generator. And then as long as the gate's open, it'll hold at the sustain level. And then as soon as the gate closes or the gate signal goes away, then the release happens, right? And so you're able to basically convert this really simple on-off message into a 4-stage actual envelope shape over the volume of the sound, right? And then that is actually controlling the volume level of this amplifier, which is actually controlling the volume of our signal, of the oscillator signal, right? Question about that?
Wait, so you're saying that as you're pressing the gate, it goes through the envelope or the gate output, and then it's going through
Mhm.
the ADSR curve, but it's only going to get to the release when you take your hand off the gate. Is that right?
Yeah, so the way envelope generators respond to gate signals, right? Because a gate signal is just on or off, right? There's no kind of in between.
Yep.
So what it does is when it senses that the gate turns on, it knows that it needs to move first through the attack phase, then through the decay phase, and then stop at the sustain volume level, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's
Okay.
yeah, so it starts at 0 volume and it goes up to the maximum volume and then it goes down to whatever the sustained volume level is, right? And then when the gate input turns off, that's when it says, okay,
Mhm.
over the course of the release time, go down from the sustained volume level all the way down back to 0.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So from a visualization standpoint, when you're kind of doing this, can you see? Oh, okay. So you can see the milliseconds of the
Yeah, you can see the milliseconds when you hover over each of these, and you can also see the sustain is going to show as like a percentage. So if I turn the sustain kind of up to maybe
Oh,
70% there, and then the release is also going to be in milliseconds, right?
all right.
And then also in this one, which is kind of nice, you can see a little dot move through the phases, right?
Yeah.
So it settles there, and you'll notice that when I change my sustain level on my envelope, it also changes the VCA level, right? Right.
What is the inputs, I guess, in the attack, decay, sustain, release, or
Ah, so these inputs, if you wanted to modulate
oh,
the time or the level of the
right.
attack, decay, sustain, and releases, you could put signals into these and actually have them be modulated by something else,
No.
right? Say if you wanted to use an LFO to make the kind of like attack time of your sound change over time, you could do that by putting an LFO signal directly into here. All
Wow.
right. Yep.
That's cool.
Um, so the next thing that we might want to do before we get into that, because that's a little bit of an extra layer of kind of like
Hmm.
complication, I'll say. All right. I'm going to go ahead and add one more VCA first. because we have our gate signal, which is controlling this ADSR envelope generator. But you'll notice that our kind of volume level peaks at basically like the very, very maximum that this VCA will go. If I turn the sustain all the way up, right? But if I'm playing this instrument on a MIDI keyboard, the MIDI keyboard has velocity as an option, right? You want to be able to maybe control something like the overall total volume of the sound, depending on how hard you play the keys, right? So what I can do is I can actually take this signal, and apologies for that turning back on. All right. Okay. So now what I've got is I've got my envelope generator signal going into the signal input of this second VCA, and then the output of that second VCA going into the control input of the first VCA, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the control input and then route the velocity output into that. So now I actually have velocity control. Right. Now, the reason why this works is what I'm doing is I'm using this velocity control signal, which you can see is just a static kind of voltage in this case, right? It says it's at 7.008 volts. And if I play a little softer, it goes all the way down to like 0.6. A little harder, it goes all the way almost up to 10, right? So that's just like a static level. But what that's doing is that is actually attenuating the signal level of the output of my envelope generator for me, right? So my envelope generator is pretty much always going to be just sort of like a full range signal. It's either going to go from 0 all the way up to kind of like positive 10 volts or from, positive 10 volts down to 0. But this way I can use that velocity control and a voltage controlled amplifier to essentially make it so that I can control the volume of that envelope generator signal. All right. And then that goes into this other VCA, which actually controls the volume of the audio output, right? So that's why I kind of said that, VCAs or voltage controlled amplifiers are kind of the backbone and like the most common kind of utility in kind of designing synthesizer architecture. Because really what they're used for is they're used to kind of control the level of signals as they kind of go between one place and another place. Not just audio signals, but also control signals, right? I'll turn that sustain down just a touch. Maybe get the attack time a little bit, maybe the K time up a touch. Right. Cool. No, oops. Look at a tiny bit with this. All right, cool. So now let's add a way of kind of processing the actual audio of our sound a little bit into this. And we can do that with a voltage controlled filter right here. All right. So what we can do with this is we can take the audio output from that VCA, and let's just use the low pass filter for now. And then we'll get this audio input and will go out there, right? And so right now we just have a super simple low pass filter that we can adjust manually with this dial, right? You adjust the resonance of that. Right. But we don't want to just manually change all of those things, right? We don't want to have to go in and click on this. We want to maybe actually use some kind of a control signal to actually control that cutoff, right? And maybe even the resonance too, although we'll kind of turn that off for now. So we kind of have a choice here. Right now, our synth only has one envelope generator, right? And sometimes, depending on how kind of like simple you want the synthesizer to be, sometimes you can get away with just having a single envelope generator and using it for maybe both the cutoff filter and also the kind of like volume of the overall sound. But for this one, I think we could do two envelope generators, right? So we're going to go ahead and take our same gate signal and we're going to grab it from the gate output of the MIDI CV device. And we're going to go ahead and take our envelope output and we are going to add it to the cutoff input control right there, right? Now, you can see that this envelope generator is moving through its different phases, but it doesn't really sound like we're actually getting, and I'm just going to switch us back to the sawtooth wave because I think that'll be a little easier to hear. To me, it doesn't really sound like we're getting any motion on that cutoff yet, right? So, thing to note about a ton of things in especially VCV Rack, but this could be true about a bunch of other synthesizers that you might use, right? You notice this little dial right next to this sort of CV input. So this is an attenuverter, right? Um, this is going to do something very, very similar to this VCA that we used to control the kind of overall level of the volume with the velocity here. But if I turn this in the kind of the positive direction, that's going to basically just function as a little kind of volume dial for the input here. So it's going to kind of attenuate and turn up that signal coming from this envelope generator output. And now we can hear that our cutoff is actually moving. Right? So a lot of devices are going to have some kind of a amount control for a control signal, right? In VCV Rack, what that control signal is really kind of depends on what you want it to be. It could be really anything. But in most like synthesizer plugins, you're going to have maybe kind of a dedicated control of it's just going to be a single knob like this, and it's going to say sort of like filter envelope amount, right? And that's going to be sort of the amount of kind of or the volume of sort of the control signal that's coming in from an envelope generator like this into the filter cutoff. And, what's kind of interesting about the ones in VCV Rack 2 is they start off kind of at zero, but they can go negative if you want them to, right? So what I could do is I could take my cutoff of this low pass filter and I could turn it all the way up And if I have that at 0, basically just going to let the kind of full signal through. Or if I turn this down now, my envelope shape is kind of backwards, right, on that filter cutoff amount. It's actually starting at all the way open and then turning down when it gets to the top of the attack phase, turning back up a bit when it gets to the end of the decay phase. And then you'll notice at the very end there, I'll turn this up a touch. During the release phase of the other envelope generator, it gets a little bit brighter. Right. So for this synth, or at least for the sound that I'm making right now, I don't necessarily want that. So I'm going to turn that back down a bit. And then I'm going to take my cutoff frequency CV and I'm going to turn it back up. Right. So I have my more kind of standard low pass filter opening and closing motion. Right. And then obviously I can use this envelope generator to kind of shape that sound. Make it a little more plucky. Or I can make it a little brassier by having the attack and decay kind of up. Or I can turn my sustain up. So it stays a bit brighter when the sustain is kind of active, right? Cool. All right. Any more questions before we kind of go on to more things and make the synth more complicated?
So just maybe, can you just summarize the two ADSRs again?
Yes.
Sorry.
So reason why there's two ADSRs is this one is just controlling the volume of the sound. This one is controlling the cutoff of our filter.
Okay.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah. So they're doing two different jobs basically. Right now, they kind of this envelope shapes are pretty similar. But if I were to make this one kind of quite a bit different than it is right now. Right. So for the envelope one, the volume kind of turns up all the way right away, and then it kind of falls to a pretty high sustain level. For this one, we have a long attack time. We have kind of a shorter decay time, and we have a lower sustain level for the filter cutoff. Turn my release time up on that volume a little bit. So reason why I've got two of them is because to make a more kind of complex sound, I can have a different envelope shape for my volume of the sound and a different envelope shape for the cutoff of the filter that's being applied to the sound, right? Um, so let's go ahead and complicate things a little bit more. We're going to add a low frequency oscillator, right? And I'm going to put this kind of down here now. And the thing that we kind of want to do is we want to take this LFO and we want to be able to kind of like do a couple of things with it. Thing number one, you'll notice that we have basically the same set of outputs that we do on our regular VCO, right? Just the sine wave, triangle wave, sawtooth wave, square wave. So what we could do is we could kind of duplicate these two modules. Bring this one down here, and I'll duplicate this one, and this one down here. And I can set up kind of the exact same scheme where I've got this sends a trigger input to switch in between each of these four signal types. And they're all kind of mixed together, and then they're going to get sent somewhere, right? So where could we send this signal, right? You can send it to a couple of places. First of all, I kind of want to make sure you're sort of seeing the difference between these signal outputs right here that are like changing super rapidly. And you can see that light is kind of that flashing orange. That lets you know that that's an audio signal for the most part. But these are definitely LFO signals because they are changing at a really, really slow rate. And then we can use our frequency dial to turn those down, and we can visibly see that get much slower, or turn them up. And we can visibly see all of those get nice and fast until we can actually get into kind of audio rates with this LFO, but it only goes up to 1,000 hertz-ish, right? I'll turn that back down to something much slower. So where can we send this signal? The simplest thing that we could do is we could use this as like a vibrato source, right? So our VCO has this frequency modulation input in it, right? You can kind of think of that as like a secondary pitch input a lot of the time. So what I could do is I could go this main output of this switch, and I could put it into this FM VCO, right? You'll notice that this FM input has one of those attenuverters attached to it, right? So right now, if I play a note, the LFO is not doing anything to the pitch of the signal because I haven't gone in and I haven't turned up the kind of amount of that control signal into this sort of pitch input. But if I start playing a note, now I can add and then and that rate up, get that nice kind of vibrato sound. Now, you might have noticed something about the way I kind of have gone about this, which is that this dial has only been turned up to 2.4% up, right? And this is already kind of an intensive amount of vibrato. If I were to turn that up even a little bit more, it kind of jumped all the way up to like 30% just now. So let's listen to that. Now we're getting into kind of like laser zap, like dub siren territory already, right? So what that means is that that kind of attenuverter might not necessarily be the best kind of like tool for what we're doing here. It might not necessarily be the best way to kind of go about adding kind of vibrato, right, with this LFO. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that control signal. And I'm going to go back to our VCA and just give us another VCA. We're going to take the output of the LFO and we're going to send it to, just for right now, our FM input, right? And then I'm going to go ahead and turn that up, maybe all the way up to like 2-3% or something. So it can be kind of an intense vibrato, right? Now, this VCA I could take something from maybe my MIDI keyboard. I could use it as a control signal to turn up and down this VCA, right? You'll notice down here, we've got pitch wheel output and mod wheel output on our MIDI module. So I'm going to go ahead and take the mod wheel output, and then I'm going to put it into the CV input of the VCA, right? And now, when I can play a note, I can use that control voltage input to control the volume of my LFO signal, right? Because I'm using this mod wheel kind of control signal as just like a way to turn up and down this voltage controlled amplifier. And then this LFO signal is being turned kind of up and down in volume. And I've just added a little bit of kind of FM input amount in the attenuator there. So it is going to receive it when it gets turned all the way up, but only when I actually turn up the mod wheel on the keyboard. Right. There's something else that I could maybe do with the LFO to have it kind of change with some other kind of MIDI actions, right? We have this aftertouch output, right? And maybe what I could do is I could take the aftertouch and I could route it to the FM input of the LFO here, or I could maybe put it into the clock input of the LFO. Clock input and FM inputs on the low frequency oscillator are going to be kind of a little bit different. I have to assume that our clock input is going to kind of get moved in like steps versus the FM input is going to kind of get moved kind of in like slow kind of increments, right? And you'll notice that the FM input has an attenuator attached to it and the clock input does not, right? So you'll notice that the clock input on this low frequency oscillator is in kind of the same place as this volts per octave input. So you can kind of think of this input as the like, pitch input or the main kind of pitch input of the LFO, but you don't really measure LFOs in pitch. You kind of measure them in like time, in like milliseconds, right? So if I turn the mod wheel all the way up, yeah. So that clock input, I think, is expecting a regular series of time inputs. It's not necessarily expecting a variable kind of signal like this. So I think it actually makes much more sense to go into the FM input there, right? We can use the clock input in a minute, and I'll show you how that can actually be really useful for us. But I'm going to turn the frequency down a touch. And so now what we have is we have our mod wheel on the keyboard that I've got right here controlling the amount of the LFO. And then my aftertouch control, if I go and turn up the FM amount by a bit, you can use that keyboard aftertouch to now change the rate of our LFO. Right? Which is kind of fun, It's not necessarily something that I would always see in a synthesizer, but it should be kind of like an option sometimes for a lot of synthesizers.